was one of America's most able and popular news commentators. On his retirement, he was reminiscing about his many years as a news correspondent and commentator in the nation's capital. He talked of another commentator who he said knew everyone worth knowing: the president, the diplomats, the senators, the president's cabinet, key bureaucrats, and the social elite. He had the contacts, and he was stuffed with information. But there was only one problem: he never used it. Severide said he forgot what he was there for. That is indeed tragic when we are talking about our jobs, but it's even more tragic when we are talking about our lives, our very being. God, the Holy Spirit, through Apostle Paul, told us what our purpose is as members of this church. May we never forget what we, the church, are here for. First, according to Ephesians chapter 4, we must have a personal walk in Jesus. And that personal walk in Jesus has 5 characteristics. The first characteristic is humility. Maxie Dunham relates the following in his commentary on Ephesians. A number of years ago, the Wall Street Journal carried a story of how the movie industry is plagued by pride and rampaging egos. The question is how to resolve which star gets top billing, whose name appears first, and in what size letters. Months of delicate negotiation are sometimes required to deal with what one writer calls a conceit of the industry. To satisfy 2 superstars, the studio created 2 sets of screen titles and 2 sets of ads, with one star named first in each. Then they had to run each ad 50% of the time. In another situation, a studio placed one star's name on the left, the normal spot for top billing, while the other star's name on the right appeared a half line higher. When pictures of both stars were used in ads, again one was placed on the left, and while the other on the right was placed slightly higher. Talk about getting a little petty. In our personal walk with Jesus, we are called to walk with humility. Also, Paul says that our walk is to be characterized by gentleness. Aristotle defines gentle as the middle between being too angry and never being angry at all. The Greek word for gentle, when used for an animal, means one which has been trained and domesticated until it is completely under control. William Barclay says, he is the man who is so God-controlled that he is always angry at the right time and never angry at the wrong time. To humility and gentleness, Paul adds being patient. In the New Testament, patience always means never giving up, and it always deals with people. Patience leads to love. Agape love. Agape is love that always seeks the best for others, regardless of how it is being treated. Agape is a matter of the will, not the emotions. When we get these first 4 characteristics right, I think the 5th comes naturally. It is peace, a peace that emanates from being humble, gentle, patient, and loving. It is only being treated, or by treating ourselves and others correctly, that we are able to find this true peace. So there you have the 5 characteristics of our personal walk in Jesus. Now Paul goes on to say that our purpose in the church and in the world is to do profitable work for Jesus. Once again, Paul gives us 5 characteristics of profitable work for Jesus. In order for our work for Jesus to be profitable. There we go. I'll get it right the 3rd time. We must determine what gifts that God has given us. Paul tells us that these gifts or abilities are given by Jesus, but we must accept them. We must own up to them. Sometimes we're not willing to say this is what we're gifted in or to acknowledge it. Don't leave your gifts wrapped, but open them up by using them for Jesus, knowing that they are sufficient for the work that God has called us to, the work that we have been assigned to. Once we have determined what our gifts are, then we must make sure that gifted individuals are placed in the proper offices. Paul makes it clear that God makes the person for the task. When God moves in our spirit for us to do something, it is enough to know that God has made us for this task, and that God knows what He is doing. After we have determined what our gifts are and been placed in the proper place to use them, then we must be reminded that the goal of spiritual gifts always involves ministry with others. The prolific writer Anonymous wrote this: "The parish priest of austerity climbed up a high church steeple to be near God so that he might hand in His word down to His people. When the sun was high, when the sun was low, the good man sat, unheeding sublunary things from transcendency, while he forever was reading again now and again. When he heard the creak of the weather vane a turning, he closed his eyes and said, of a truth from God I am now learning." And in servant script he daily wrote what he thought was sent from heaven, and he dropped this down on the people's heads 2 times, one day in 7. In his age God said, "Come down and die." And he cried from the steeple, "Where art thou, Lord?" And the Lord replied, "Down here among my people." Next, Paul points out that God equips His people for service. Following Jesus is not a spectator sport. God expects us to be active as long as we have life, as long as we draw breath. Bud Wilkinson, former great football coach, said, "I define football as 22 men on the field, desperately in need of rest, and 76,000 people in the stands, desperately in need of exercise." Does that ever describe the church? Surely not ours, because last time I counted, we don't have 76,000 people sitting in the pews. But thus far, we know that in order for our work for Jesus to be profitable, we must determine what our gifts are. Be placed in the right place to use them. Remember that the goal of our spiritual gifts always involves ministry with others, knowing that God equips us for service. The 5th characteristic of profitable work for Jesus is that it always works to build up or to strengthen the church. Are we using what God has given us to build the church? That should be the ultimate question in our minds, because Jesus has chosen to work through His church to spread His life, to spread His message in our world. Yes, in Ephesians chapter 4, Paul tells us that the purpose of the church is to develop a personal walk with Jesus so that we might do profitable work for Jesus. But the final goal of the church ought to be to find and experience the profound wholeness and wisdom of Jesus. It is important for us to keep searching for and growing in the wisdom of Jesus. It is the wisdom of Jesus that shows us what is important in life, what to stand for or against, and what comprises real truth. Listen to these 3 quotes. They illustrate what the wisdom of Jesus does for us. Robert K. Rudolph, "Open minds, like open windows, need screens to keep the bugs out." Samuel Johnson, "It is more from carelessness about truth than from intentional lying that there is so much falsehood in the world." And Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, "It is easier to perceive error than to find truth, for the former lies on the surface and is easily seen, while the latter lies in the depth, where few are willing to search for it." It is as we experience the wisdom for Jesus and of Jesus in our lives, that we move on to the wholeness that is found in Jesus. What is the wholeness of Jesus? It is found in growing in Jesus, more and more like Him in our values and our principles. It is found in growing with others. This Christian faith is never to be lived in isolation, but with others. And it is found in growing in love. Love is a divine spark breathed into every human being. Will we fan that spark into flame, or will we allow it to smolder and go out? This morning, are we experiencing a personal walk with Jesus? Are we involved in doing profitable work for Jesus? And are we growing in the profound wholeness and wisdom of Jesus? The choice is ours. This morning, we have the opportunity to receive communion. Communion is the outward sign of God's grace that is given to each and every one of us. If we're willing to partake, let us prepare our hearts and minds to receive communion.